My name is Emily and I'm 32. I'm sitting in a Virginia courtroom, the air heavy with silence except for my husband Nathan's smug chuckle. He's signing our divorce papers, his pen scratching, like he's won some grand prize. His mocking glance cuts deep, but I clutch my grandmother's silver locket, my anchor. He thinks he knows me, thinks he's walked away with everything. But I've got a secret one that's about to change it all. Have you ever been underestimated? Stick around to see how I turn the tables. Where are you watching from? Hit like, subscribe, and let's dive into this story together. I can still smell the lavender from the bouquet I carried down the aisle 5 years ago. Nathan and I got married in a little chapel outside Richmond, the kind with creaky pews and stained glass that made the sunlight dance. I was 27, full of dreams, believing his promises of a life built together. He looked at me that day, his eyes soft, swearing we'd conquer the world. I held on to that moment, replaying it like a favorite song even when things started to shift. 6 months in, I started noticing cracks. I'd always wanted to open a bakery, a cozy spot where people could taste my grandmother's lemon tarts, the ones I'd perfected since I was a kid. Late at night in our cramped apartment kitchen, I'd whisk flour and sugar, the oven's warmth, my only company. Nathan would stumble in, grab a tart, and laugh, crumbs falling on the counter. "This is cute, Emily," he'd say, "but it's just a hobby, right? We've got bigger plans." His words stung, but I smiled, thinking he just didn't get it yet. I kept baking, though, sneaking in hours after he'd gone to bed. The kitchen became my sanctuary where I could dream without his judgment. One night I burned a batch of scones and the smoke detector blared. Nathan stormed in, his face twisted. "You're wasting time on this mess," he snapped, waving at the flour-dusted counters. "I'm out here closing deals and you're playing house." I mumbled an apology, my cheeks hot, but inside I felt something shrink. Was I foolish for wanting this? My best friend Clara saw it before I did. She'd come over with her daughter Sophie, a 4-year-old with pigtails who loved my cookies. Clara, a nurse working double shifts, had her own scars from a bad marriage. Over coffee, she'd watch Nathan interrupt me. His voice always louder and her eyes would narrow. "He's trying to box you in, Em," she said once, stirring her mug. "Don't let him make your world smaller." I laughed it off, saying he was just stressed from work. But her words stuck like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Things got worse when Nathan took over our finances. He'd been promoted at his real estate firm, and suddenly he was all about streamlining our life. One evening, he sat me down with a spreadsheet, his laptop glowing between us. "We need to cut your unnecessary spending," he said, pointing at lines labeled art supplies and baking ingredients. I stared at the screen, my throat tight. "Those are for my dreams," I said softly. He chuckled like I'd told a joke. "Dreams don't pay bills, Emily. I got us a new golf set for client meetings. That's an investment." I didn't argue. I just nodded, my hands folded in my lap. But that night, I lay awake listening to Nathan's snores, wondering when I'd stopped recognizing myself. Clara's warning echoed, and I started to see it, the way he'd dismiss my ideas, the way he'd make decisions without asking. I wanted to believe we could fix it, that love was enough. But then I found something that made my stomach drop. It was a Saturday and Nathan was at an open house. I was cleaning out the hall closet when I found a shoebox tucked behind his old sneakers. Inside were credit card statements, ones he'd never shown me. My hands shook as I read them, charges for restaurants I'd never been to, a hotel in DC, and a jewelry store. Hundreds, then thousands of dollars, all on a card in his name alone. I sat on the floor, the papers scattered around me, my heart pounding. Who was he spending this on, and why was he hiding it? I clutched those credit card statements, my fingers crumpling the edges as if squeezing them could make the truth disappear. The closet felt smaller, the air stale. I wanted to confront Nathan, to demand answers, but my courage faltered. What if I was wrong? What if he had an explanation? I shoved the papers back into the shoebox, promising myself I'd ask him later. But deep down, I knew I was stalling, afraid of what I'd uncover. The next morning, Nathan was all smiles, sipping coffee at our kitchen table, his phone buzzing with texts. I watched him, searching for a hint of guilt, but he seemed lighter than ever, joking about a new client he'd charmed. "Big commission coming," he said, winking. "We're set, babe." I forced a smile, my stomach churning. Was this the man I'd vowed to love forever? I poured myself coffee, the mug warm against my palms, and tried to act normal. But every sip tasted bitter. Clara came over that afternoon, her nursing scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. Sophie was at daycare, so it was just us sprawled on my couch with a bowl of popcorn. I hadn't planned to tell her about the statements, but her quiet presence pulled the words out. I found something, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I told her everything, the hidden charges, the hotel, the jewelry store. Her face hardened, but she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she set the popcorn down and looked at me, her eyes fierce. "You need to check his accounts, Emily," she said. "Not just the ones he shows you. All of them." I shook my head, my hands twisting in my lap. What if it's nothing? I'll look paranoid. Clara leaned closer, her voice steady. "You're not paranoid. You're protecting yourself. I wish I'd done that sooner with my ex." Her words hit hard, reminding me of her own divorce, the way her husband had drained their savings before leaving. I nodded, but inside I was terrified. That night I waited until Nathan was asleep, his phone charging on his nightstand. My heart pounded as I crept out of bed, the floorboards creaking under my feet. I grabbed his phone, my hands trembling as I typed in his passcode, the one he'd used since we met. His banking app opened and I scrolled through transactions, my breath catching. There were transfers to an account I didn't recognize, small at first, then larger, totaling thousands. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from a quiet rage I didn't know I could feel. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wall. The man I loved was hiding something, maybe someone. I thought of our wedding, his hand in mine, the way he'd whispered, "You're my home." Was that a lie too? I wanted to scream to shake him awake, but I stayed silent, my mind racing. Clara's advice echoed, but so did my fear of losing him, of being alone. The next day, Nathan announced he wanted me to quit my part-time job at the library. "You don't need it," he said, tossing his car keys on the counter. "I'm making enough for both of us. Let's focus on starting a family." His tone was casual, but it felt like a command. I stared at him, my voice caught in my throat. The library job wasn't much, but it was mine, a few hours a week where I could be Emily, not just Nathan's wife. "I like my job," I said finally, my voice small. He rolled his eyes. "You're being selfish. Think about us." That was the moment I felt it, a hollowness I couldn't name. He wasn't just dismissing my job. He was erasing me piece by piece. I thought of the secret account, the statements, the life he was building without me. I went to the kitchen, pulled out my mixing bowl, and started baking, my hands moving on autopilot. The rhythm of kneading dough steadied me, but it couldn't silence the question burning in my chest: what else was he hiding? The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, but my hands trembled as I slid a tray of rolls into the oven. Baking wasn't calming me anymore. It was just a distraction from the truth I couldn't ignore. Nathan's secret account haunted me, those numbers flashing in my mind like a warning. I'd started checking his phone whenever he showered, my heart racing as I scrolled through more transfers, more lies. Then I found the receipt crumpled in his car's glove compartment for a diamond bracelet. $3,000. I'd never seen it on my wrist. I sat in the driver's seat, the receipt shaking in my hand, picturing another woman wearing that bracelet. My chest tightened, not just from jealousy, but from the betrayal of being so blind. I drove home, the radio off, my thoughts louder than any song. Nathan was at work, so I called my sister Hannah. She was a lawyer, sharp and no nonsense, always the one I turned to when I felt lost. "I'm coming over," she said, her voice firm. "Don't do anything until I get there." Hannah arrived an hour later, her briefcase tucked under her arm, her dark hair pulled back. She sat me down at the dining table, her eyes scanning my face. "Show me everything," she said. I handed her the receipt and a printout of the bank transfers I'd screenshot. She studied them, her jaw tight. "This isn't just carelessness, Emily," she said. "He's hiding a whole life from you. We need to dig deeper." I nodded, but my stomach twisted. Digging meant facing the truth, and I wasn't sure I was ready. She pulled out her laptop and logged into a database she used for work. "Let's check his credit report," she said, typing fast. I watched my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles whitened. The screen loaded, and there it was, another credit card, one I'd never heard of, with a balance of $10,000. Charges for wine bars, a spa, a boutique in Georgetown. Places we'd never gone together. He's living like a king, Hannah muttered, while you're scraping by on $50 a week. I felt sick, my face hot with shame. How had I let this happen? I thought of the nights I'd spent budgeting, skipping new shoes to save for our future, while Nathan was buying gifts for someone else. Hannah reached for my hand. You need to confront him, she said. Or I can if you want. I shook my head. No, it has to be me. But the thought of facing him made my throat close up. That evening Nathan came home late, his tie loosened, a faint whiff of cologne I didn't recognize. I waited until he was in the kitchen grabbing a beer from the fridge before I spoke. I found a receipt, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. For a diamond bracelet. Who's it for? He froze, then turned his smile too quick. What are you talking about? It's for my sister's birthday. You know she loves jewelry. His lie was smooth practiced, but his eyes darted to the side. I wanted to believe him, to cling to the man I'd married, but the receipt burned in my pocket. Your sister lives in Ohio, I said. Why's the receipt from a DC jeweler? He laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. You're overthinking this, Emily. Relax, it's nothing. He walked past me, brushing my shoulder, and headed to the living room. I stood there, my fists clenched, his dismissal cutting deeper than any argument. The next day, I went to his office party, a fancy event at a downtown hotel. I wore a black dress I hadn't touched in years, hoping to feel like myself again. Nathan was in his element, charming clients, his laugh echoing. Then I saw her, a woman in a red dress, her wrists sparkling with a diamond bracelet. She leaned close to Nathan, whispering, and he smiled in a way he hadn't smiled at me in years. My heart stopped. I gripped my glass, the room spinning, knowing I couldn't unsee this. I turned away from Nathan and the woman in the red dress, my heels clicking as I hurried to the hotel's balcony. The night air was cool, but it did nothing to steady my racing pulse. I gripped the railing, my knuckles pale, trying to breathe through the image of her bracelet glinting under the chandeliers. It wasn't just jewelry. It was proof of a life Nathan had built without me, a life where I was invisible. I wanted to storm back inside to confront them both, but my feet wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, drowning in my own silence. Back home, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of our bed, the comforter bunched in my fists, listening to Nathan's car pull into the driveway at 2 a.m. He stumbled in, claiming the party ran late, his breath sharp with whiskey. I didn't ask about her. I couldn't. The words felt too heavy, like they'd shatter me if I let them out. Instead, I nodded, my face blank, and he didn't notice the storm in my eyes. The next morning, I called Hannah, my voice barely above a whisper. She was at her law office, papers rustling in the background. I saw her, I said, choking on the words. At the party. She was wearing the bracelet. Hannah went quiet, then said, "Come to my place, now." I drove to her apartment, the city blurring past my windshield. She opened the door, her face tight with worry, and pulled me into a hug. "We're figuring this out," she said, but her voice shook like she knew how deep this cut. Over tea, Hannah pushed her laptop toward me. She'd found more emails from Nathan's work account, ones he hadn't bothered to delete, scheduling dinners with someone named Lauren. The woman in the red dress, I was sure of it. Each message was a knife, casual and intimate, planning weekends away, while I was home measuring flour for pastries he'd never taste. "He's been moving money too," Hannah said, pointing to a bank statement. "Our joint savings, Emily. He's drained half of it into that secret account." I stared at the numbers, my vision swimming. That savings was for our future, the house we'd dreamed of, the kids we'd planned. I'd scrimped, skipped vacations while he funneled it to her. Why, I whispered, not expecting an answer. Hannah squeezed my shoulder. "Because he's selfish, and he thinks you won't fight back." Her words burned, not because they were wrong, but because I'd been proving him right, staying quiet, hoping he'd change. Then our stepmother, Diane, called. I hadn't told her anything, but Nathan had. "Emily, "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, her voice clipped. "Nathan's working hard for you both. Stop snooping and trust him." I gripped the phone, my jaw tight. "You don't know what he's done," I said, my voice breaking. She sighed. "You're too emotional. You'll ruin a good marriage." I hung up, tears stinging her betrayal piling onto his. I started sleeping on the couch, claiming I needed space to think. Nathan didn't care. He was barely home. I'd lie there, the clock ticking past midnight, replaying every moment I'd ignored: his late nights, his excuses, the way he'd stopped touching me. I felt like a ghost in my own life, fading with every lie he told. Clara sent me a podcast about financial independence, and I listened in the dark, my earbuds in the host's voice, urging women to take control. It sparked something, a tiny flame in my chest. I opened a secret savings account the next day, transferring $10 from the grocery budget. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then Nathan came home one evening, his face unreadable. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands folded. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat. "This isn't working. I want a divorce." The words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. He leaned back, his eyes cold. "You're holding me back, Emily. I need more." I stared at him, the man I'd loved, now a stranger, tearing my world apart. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. All I could think was, he's leaving me, and he's taking everything. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a sterile contrast to the chaos in my chest. I sat rigid, my hands clasped in my lap, as Nathan signed the divorce papers across the table. His pen scratched the page, each stroke punctuated by a low chuckle, like he was savoring a private joke. I stared at the grain of the table, my pulse hammering, trying to block out his smugness. My lawyer Rebecca sat beside me, her posture calm but her eyes sharp, like she was waiting for something. The judge, a woman with silver hair and a voice like gravel, cleared her throat. "We'll now review the financial disclosures," she said, adjusting her glasses. The room went still, the air thick with anticipation. Nathan leaned back, his arms crossed, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He thought he'd won, that he'd walk away with the savings he'd siphoned, leaving me with nothing. I swallowed hard, my fingers brushing the silver locket at my neck, the one my grandmother gave me before she passed. It was my reminder I was stronger than he knew. Rebecca had been my lifeline these past months. I'd hired her after Nathan demanded the divorce, her office a cluttered sanctuary of legal books and coffee mugs. She'd listened to my story, her brow furrowing as I detailed his lies, the secret account, the bracelet. "We're not just fighting for a fair split," she'd said, her voice steady. "We're exposing him." She'd spent weeks digging her late-night emails full of updates, each one a brick in the wall I was building. Now, as the judge flipped through our documents, I felt her hand brush mine under the table, a silent anchor. The judge began with Nathan's statement, her tone flat as she listed his assets, his real estate commissions, a modest retirement account, the car he'd bought last year. He nodded along, his confidence unshaken. Then she turned to my file, her eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned the pages. "Emily," she said, "your financial disclosure includes a business. Please clarify its nature and value." My heart lurched. This was it, the secret I'd guarded, the one Nathan never saw coming. I took a breath, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "It's a bakery," I said. "An online business I started 3 years ago, selling pastries and custom cakes." The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone braver. I glanced at Nathan, his smirk faltering, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He didn't know. He'd never asked about my late nights, the packages I shipped from the post office, the website I'd taught myself to code. To him, my baking was a hobby, a childish whim he'd mocked. The judge raised an eyebrow. "And the valuation?" she asked. Rebecca slid a document forward, her voice clear. "The business, Sweet Resilience, has been appraised at $4.2 million based on its revenue, customer base, and projected growth." The courtroom went silent, the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums. Nathan's chair creaked as he leaned forward, his face draining of color. His eyes locked on mine, wide with disbelief, searching for a lie. But there was none. I flashed back to those nights hunched over my laptop in the dark learning HTML from free tutorials, my fingers sticky with icing as I balanced orders and code. I'd started small selling tarts to neighbors, then built a website when Clara pushed me to go bigger. "You're good at this," she'd said, her voice fierce with belief. I'd poured every spare dollar into it, every ounce of my heart, while Nathan was out with her spending our savings on someone else. My business wasn't just a bakery. It was my rebellion, my proof I wasn't the woman he thought he'd broken. The judge's voice cut through my thoughts. "This valuation significantly alters the asset division," she said, her pen tapping the page. Nathan's lawyer, a balding man with a nervous tic, scrambled to respond, but Nathan interrupted, his voice sharp. "That's impossible," he snapped. "She's lying. She's just a housewife." The word stung, but I didn't flinch. I looked at him, his face twisted with panic, and felt a strange calm. He'd underestimated me, and now he was unraveling. Rebecca leaned forward, her tone icy. "We have bank records, tax filings, and an independent appraisal to substantiate the valuation," she said. "Would you like to review them?" The judge raised a hand, silencing the room. "We'll take a brief recess," she said, her gaze lingering on Nathan. "I suggest you confer with your counsel." As she rose, the gavel's echo felt like a heartbeat, and I knew the worst was still coming. The courtroom doors swung shut behind the judge, leaving a hollow silence. Nathan's face was a mask of shock, his hands gripping the table as if it could anchor him. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, the weight of my secret now a living thing between us. Clara was in the back row, her eyes locked on mine, her nod, a quiet strength. But Diane's absence burned a reminder of the family who'd chosen Nathan's charm over me. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Rebecca whispered, "You did it, Emily. He's cornered." But I didn't feel victorious. My chest ached, not from triumph, but from the wreckage of the life I'd thought we'd share. Nathan's lawyer tugged at his sleeve, murmuring urgently. But Nathan ignored him, his gaze boring into me. How he hissed, his voice low but venomous. "How did you pull this off behind my back?" His words were a blade accusing me of betrayal, as if he hadn't built a life with someone else. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was tight. Memories flooding in the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the mornings I'd forced a smile for him, the years I'd poured into a marriage he'd discarded. Rebecca stood, her voice cutting through the tension. "We have more to present," she said, sliding a folder to the judge's clerk. "Evidence of Mr. Carter's financial misconduct and infidelity relevant to the asset division." The word infidelity landed like a bomb, and Nathan's head snapped up, his eyes wild. The clerk handed the folder to the judge, who'd returned to her bench, her expression unreadable. She opened it, her fingers pausing on a photograph. My stomach twisted as I realized what it was. A grainy image from the private investigator I'd hired showing Nathan and Lauren, the woman in the red dress, arm in arm outside a hotel. The investigator's report was there too, detailing their weekends away paid for with our savings. I'd seen the photos weeks ago, but watching them laid bare in court felt like ripping open a wound. Nathan's lawyer objected, his voice shrill. "This is irrelevant, Your Honor. Character attacks have no place here." But the judge raised a hand, silencing him. "I'll determine what's relevant," she said, her tone sharp. She read on her brow, furrowing, as she flipped through bank records, showing Nathan's transfers to Lauren's account disguised as business expenses. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, every rustle of paper deafening. Clara gripped the bench, her knuckles white, her presence the only thing keeping me grounded. Nathan stood his chair, scraping the floor. "This is a setup," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She's fabricating this to steal from me." The judge's gavel slammed, the sound echoing in my skull. "Sit down, Mr. Carter," she ordered. He obeyed, but his eyes never left me, blazing with a mix of rage and desperation. I looked away, my hands trembling in my lap, the locket cold against my skin. He wasn't just losing money. He was losing the image he'd crafted, the perfect husband exposed as a fraud. The judge turned to me, her voice measured. "Mrs. Carter, did you have any knowledge of these transactions?" I shook my head, my voice barely audible. "No, Your Honor. I found out months ago after he asked for the divorce. Saying it aloud made it real, the betrayal a weight I couldn't shake. The judge nodded, her pen scratching notes. "We'll resume after I review this evidence," she said, rising again. "Court is adjourned for 1 hour." As the room emptied, Nathan's stare followed me, his silence louder than his outburst. I felt Clara's hand on my shoulder, but I couldn't meet her eyes. The truth was out, my success undeniable, his lies exposed. But all I felt was emptiness, a hollow ache where love used to be. I'd won this moment, but at what cost? My marriage, my trust, my sense of self, they were gone, and I didn't know how to rebuild from here. I left the courtroom with Clara's arm around me, her warmth a tether to reality. The hallway was a blur of beige walls and hushed voices, but Nathan's glare lingered in my mind, his accusations echoing like a bad dream. I felt raw, exposed, like the truth had stripped me bare. But beneath the ache, a spark flickered, something I hadn't felt in years: resolve. I wasn't the woman he'd dismissed anymore. I'd built something, and I wasn't letting him take it. The next morning I woke in Clara's guest room, the scent of her lavender candles grounding me. Over breakfast, she pushed a mug of tea into my hands. "What's your next move?" she asked, her eyes steady. I stared at the steam curling from the mug, my thoughts settling. "I'm done hiding," I said. "I'm taking my bakery to the next level. And I'm living for me." Clara grinned, her nod a quiet cheer. I started small but deliberate. I found a storefront for lease in a bustling part of Richmond, a narrow space with big windows and chipped brick walls. It wasn't much, but it felt like a promise. I signed the lease that week, my pen steady, despite the butterflies in my stomach. I spent a day painting the walls pale yellow, the color of my grandmother's old kitchen, each brushstroke a reclaiming of my space. Clara helped, her laughter filling the room as we splattered paint on our jeans. The bakery wasn't just a business anymore, it was my defiance. I'd kept Sweet Resilience online shipping orders from my apartment, but now I wanted a place where people could walk in, smell fresh bread, and feel at home. I spent evenings sketching the layout: wooden tables, a glass case for pastries, a chalkboard menu. I poured my savings into it, the money I'd hidden from Nathan, every dollar a step toward freedom. Hannah called that week, her voice tense. "Diane's been talking to Nathan," she said. "She thinks you're being unfair, keeping the business from him." I gripped the phone, my jaw tight. Diane's betrayal wasn't new, but it still stung, a reminder of the family I'd lost in this mess. "Let her talk," I said. "I'm done explaining myself." Hannah hesitated, then added, "She's coming to my place tonight. I'm telling her everything. You in?" I paused, the weight of that conversation heavy. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'll be there." That night I drove to Hannah's apartment, the city lights streaking past. Diane was already there, perched on the couch, her arms crossed. She looked at me, her lips pursed. "You're making a spectacle, Emily," she said. "Nathan deserves a share of your success." I took a breath, my voice calm but firm. "He deserves nothing. He lied, cheated, and stole from me. I built this alone." Diane's eyes widened, but she didn't argue. Hannah stepped in, her voice sharp, laying out Nathan's deceit, the money, the affair. Diane's face softened, but I didn't wait for her apology. I left, my heart pounding, feeling lighter for speaking my truth. Back at the storefront, I started hiring. I met Lily, a quiet 22-year-old with a shy smile and a story that hit close to home. She'd left an abusive boyfriend, her hands still shaking when she talked about it. I saw myself in her, the woman I'd been before I found my strength. I hired her on the spot, teaching her to knead dough, her laughter slowly replacing her fear. "You're giving me a chance," she said one day, her eyes bright. I smiled, my throat tight. "You're giving me one too." I named my new pastry line Resilience Tarts, each one a buttery shell filled with bold flavors: blackberry, sage, peach, rosemary. They were my story, tough and tender, and I posted them online, my fingers trembling as I hit publish. The response was instant, orders flooding in, social media buzzing with photos of my tarts. Clara sent me a screenshot of a viral post, her text simple: "You're unstoppable." I read it, my chest swelling, knowing I was just getting started. The bakery's grand opening was a week away, and I was elbow-deep in flower-shaping dough for the first batch of Resilience tarts to display. The storefront hummed with possibility, the pale yellow walls glowing under soft lights I'd hung myself. Lily was at the counter practicing her piping technique, her focus a quiet mirror of my own. Every tart, every shelf I stocked, felt like a brick laid in a new foundation one Nathan couldn't touch. But his shadow lingered a weight I hadn't fully shaken. Clara stopped by after her shift, her nursing bag slung over her shoulder. She surveyed the shop, her eyes bright. "This is you, Emily," she said, touching a wooden table I'd sanded smooth. "Not him." I nodded, but my throat tightened. I'd told her about the viral tarts, the orders pouring in, but not about the fear that crept in at night, the worry that Nathan would find a way to ruin this. "He's not done," I admitted, my voice low. "He'll come for the business." She frowned, setting her bag down. "Let him try. You've got Rebecca, and you're stronger than he knows." Her words steadied me, but the fear didn't vanish. That evening I got a call from Rebecca. "Nathan's filed a claim," she said, her voice clipped. "He's saying he supported your business in its early days, deserves a cut." I gripped the phone, my pulse spiking. The audacity of it after he'd mocked my baking, after he'd stolen our savings. "He has no proof," I said, my voice harder than I expected. Rebecca agreed, but added, "He's desperate. Stay sharp." I hung up my hands, shaking as I locked the shop. The street was quiet, the city's hum distant. I thought of Nathan's smirk in court, his belief that I was nothing without him. That belief had kept me small for years, but not anymore. I walked to a nearby coffee shop, pulled out my laptop, and started drafting a business plan. I'd been accepted for a small business grant, one I'd applied for in secret months ago, and now I needed to prove I deserved it. I wrote late into the night, outlining plans for a second location, a catering arm, a community baking program. Each word was a declaration, this was mine, and I'd fight for it. The next day, I met Lily at the shop early. She'd brought a sketchbook, her ideas for a new tart design scribbled in pencil. "I thought maybe a lavender one," she said, her voice tentative. "For calm, you know, after hard times." I looked at her, this young woman rebuilding herself, and felt a surge of pride. "Let's make it," I said, handing her an apron. We spent hours testing recipes, the kitchen filled with the scent of herbs and sugar. Her laughter, so rare when we'd met, was a gift, reminding me why I'd started this. Hannah texted me that afternoon, asking to meet. I drove to her office, the grant application still buzzing in my mind. She was waiting outside, her coat buttoned against the fall chill. "I talked to Diane again," she said, her voice careful. "She's sorry, Emily. She wants to make it right." I looked away, the sting of Diane's dismissal still fresh. "I don't know if I can trust her," I said. Hannah nodded, her eyes soft. "You don't have to yet. Just know she's trying." I didn't respond, but her words planted a seed, a possibility of healing I wasn't ready to face. Back at the shop, I found a letter slipped under the door, the handwriting unfamiliar. It was from a local food critic requesting a visit for a feature article. My heart leapt, then sank. Exposure was everything, but it also meant scrutiny, a chance for Nathan to twist the narrative. I tucked the letter away, my resolve hardening. I wasn't just fighting for a business. I was fighting for the woman I'd become, the one who'd risen from his lies. That night I stood alone in the shop, the lights off, the city quiet beyond the windows. I ran my fingers over the counter, smooth from hours of work, and felt a stillness settle in me. Nathan could sue Diane, could doubt, but this space, this life was mine. I locked the door, my steps steady, and walked into the night, ready to face whatever came next. The grand opening of Sweet Resilience was a blur of clinking glasses and warm smiles, the air thick with the scent of fresh tarts. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, my apron dusted with flour, feeling like I'd finally claimed my place. But Nathan's lawsuit hung over me, a shadow I couldn't shake. Rebecca had called that morning, her voice steady. "The judge threw out his claim," she said. "We proved he had no stake in your business." I'd exhaled, relief washing over me, but it felt fragile, like glass waiting to crack. I hosted a small celebration that night. Just Clara, Hannah, and Lily gathered around a table in the shop's back room. I'd made lemonade, the kind my grandmother used to pour tart and bright. Clara raised her glass, her eyes gleaming. To Emily, who built this from nothing, she said. We clinked the sound sharp in the quiet, but my smile wavered. Nathan's defeat was real, but it didn't erase the years he'd taken. Lily spoke up, her voice soft. I told my therapist about you, she said, twisting a napkin. How you gave me this job, believed in me. It's helping me heal. Her words landed heavy, a reminder of why I kept going. I reached for her hand, my throat tight. You're doing the work, Lily, I said. I'm just here. She nodded, her eyes bright, and I felt a warmth I hadn't in months, a sense that my choices were rippling outward. The next day I got a call from the grant committee. My application had been approved $50,000 to fund a second location. I stood in the shop, the phone pressed to my ear, my breath catching. It wasn't just money. It was proof I'd bet on myself and won. I called Clara, my voice shaking as I told her. You're unstoppable, she said, echoing her text from weeks ago. I hung up, staring at the chalkboard menu, my handwriting curling across it. This was mine, and no one could take it. But Diane's silence gnawed at me. Hannah had warned me she was struggling, guilt eating at her for siding with Nathan. I'd avoided her calls, my hurt too raw to bridge. Then she showed up at the shop unannounced, her coat damp from the morning drizzle. I was wrong, she said, her voice low, her eyes avoiding mine. I didn't see him for what he was. I stood behind the counter, my hands still the hum of the coffee machine filling the pause. I needed you, I said finally, my voice steady but sharp. You chose him. She flinched, her fingers twisting her scarf. I know, she whispered. I'm sorry. I didn't respond, didn't offer the forgiveness she wanted. I turned back to the espresso machine, steaming milk, the hiss drowning out her presence. She left quietly, the bell above the door jingling, and I felt a pang, not of anger but of loss. Diane had been my family, flawed but constant, and now that bond was frayed, maybe broken. I wiped the counter, my movements slow, the weight of her apology settling like dust. The local paper ran a feature on Sweet Resilience that weekend, the critic's visit turning into a full-page spread. I read it at the shop, my hands smudging the ink, the headline bold, From Heartbreak to Triumph, A Baker's Rise. It detailed my journey, the divorce, the business, painting me as a symbol of resilience. Customers flooded in, their faces curious, some sharing their own stories of starting over. I listened, nodding, but felt exposed, like my pain was on display. The article didn't mention Nathan, but his absence screamed loud, a ghost in every line. I closed the shop, late, the city dark beyond the windows. I sat at a table, the article spread before me, my reflection faint in the glass. Nathan's lawsuit was dead, my business was soaring, but I felt hollow, the victory bittersweet. I'd won, but the scars he'd left were still tender, and I didn't know how to heal them. The bell jingled, startling me, and I looked up, my breath catching at the sight of an envelope slid under the door, my name scrawled in sharp, angry ink. I picked up the envelope, my fingers brushing the rough paper, the weight of my name in that jagged scrawl sending a chill through me. I didn't open it right away. I stood in the dim shop, the hum of the fridge, the only sound, and stared at the door, half expecting someone to step through. The city outside was asleep, but my pulse wasn't. I slid the envelope into my bag, locked up, and drove home, the streetlights blurring into streaks of gold. In my apartment, I sat on the couch, the envelope on the coffee table like an uninvited guest. I poured a glass of water, the clink of ice loud in the quiet, and finally tore it open. It was a handwritten note, unsigned, but the venom was unmistakable. You think you've won, but you're nothing without him. My breath caught, not from fear, but from recognition. Nathan's coworker, the one who'd flirted with him at the office party, her smirk burned into my memory. This was her lashing out, a petty echo of his defeat. I crumpled the note, my hands steady but my chest tight. It wasn't just her words. It was the truth they grazed. I'd built Sweet Resilience, but the cost was still raw. My marriage, my family, the years I'd spent doubting myself. I dropped the paper into the trash, but its sting lingered, a reminder that Nathan's world still reached for me even in ruins. I didn't sleep that night, my eyes tracing the ceiling, the note's venom mixing with my own doubts. The next morning I threw myself into the shop, training Lily on inventory, her quiet focus a balm. She'd started opening up, sharing bits of her past, and I listened, nodding, seeing my old self in her hesitations. "You ever feel like you're faking it?" she asked, stacking boxes. I paused, a tray of tarts in my hands. "Every day," I said, my voice soft. "But you keep going. That's what makes it real." She smiled, small but genuine, and I felt a shift, like I was carrying her strength too. Hannah called later, her voice bright but careful. "The article's gone viral," she said. "You're trending locally." I leaned against the counter, the phone warm against my ear. The feature had brought crowds, but it also brought whispers, people eyeing me like I was a story, not a person. "It's good," I said, but my tone was flat. "Just feels strange." She paused, then added, "Diane saw it. She cried. Emily, she wants to talk." I closed my eyes. Diane's guilt still a bruise. "Not yet," I said, and hung up the silence, heavy. The shop stayed busy, customers lining up, their chatter a steady hum. A woman bought a tart, then lingered, her eyes soft. "I read about you," she said. "I left my husband last year. You give me hope." I nodded, my throat tight, her words a mirror to Lily's. But hope felt distant, like a light I could see but not touch. Nathan's loss was public now, his affair and fraud whispered about in circles he'd once charmed. I'd wanted him to hurt, but seeing it didn't heal me. I found a voicemail from Rebecca that evening, her voice crisp. "Nathan's firm let him go," she said. "His reputation's shot. You're clear." I played it again, sitting in my car outside the shop, the engine off. He'd fallen just as I'd risen, but the victory tasted like ash. I thought of the man I'd loved, the one who danced with me at our wedding, now a stranger undone by his own greed. I deleted the message, my finger steady, but my heart wasn't. I drove to the riverfront, parking under a street lamp, the water black and still beyond the railing. I stood there, the note's words circling my mind. Diane's guilt, Nathan's ruin, the woman's hope. I'd fought for this life, but the fight had left me hollow, a shell of triumphs and scars. I gripped the railing, the metal cold, and let the river's quiet swallow me, my breath fogging in the night. No answers in sight. I needed to get away, to find a quiet corner of the world where I could hear my own thoughts. So I rented a cabin by Lake Gaston, a small wooden place with a sagging porch and a view of water so still it mirrored the pines. It was early fall, the air crisp, the leaves just starting to turn. I drove up alone, my car packed with a duffel bag, a notebook and a tin of my grandmother's recipes, the ones I hadn't touched since I was a girl. The city felt far away, and for the first time in months, so did Nathan's shadow. The cabin smelled of cedar and thyme, the kind of place that held stories in its walls. I unpacked slowly, setting the recipe tin on the kitchen counter, its lid dented from years of use. I didn't open it yet. I just ran my fingers over the metal, feeling the weight of my grandmother's hands in every scratch. She'd taught me to bake, to find joy in small things, and I'd lost that somewhere along the way. I wanted it back. That first morning I walked to the lake, the gravel crunching under my boots. The water was cold, lapping gently at the shore, and I sat on a flat rock, my knees pulled up, watching mist curl off the surface. I thought about the shop, the crowds, the article that had turned my life into a headline. I thought about Lily, her quiet strength, and Clara, who'd never stopped believing in me. I thought about Diane, her apology still unanswered, and Nathan, a man I'd loved, now a stranger undone. The lake didn't answer, but it listened, and that was enough. I spent the day exploring, following a trail through the woods, the scent of damp earth grounding me. I found a clearing with a rusted swing set, probably left by some family years ago. I sat on one of the swings, the chains creaking, and let myself sway, my toes brushing the grass. It was silly, childish even, but it felt like freedom, like I was allowed to be soft again. I closed my eyes, the breeze cool on my face, and let the hurt seep out. not fighting it, just letting it be. Hannah texted that afternoon asking if I was okay. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to tell her about the swing, the lake, the way I felt lighter, but words seemed too small. Instead, I invited her up for the weekend. She arrived the next day, her car kicking up dust as she pulled in. We hugged her arms tight, and I realized how much I'd missed her, not just as a sister, but as a friend. "This place suits you," she said, glancing at the cabin. I smiled, handing her a mug of coffee. "It's helping me remember who I am." We walked to the lake together, the sun low, casting gold across the water. Hannah kicked a pebble, her voice soft. "I'm sorry about Diane," she said. I pushed her to see the truth, but it wasn't my place to fix it. I nodded, my hands in my pockets. "It's okay," I said. "I'm figuring out how to let it go." We sat on the dock, our feet dangling, and talked about our childhood, the summers we'd spent chasing fireflies, the way our dad used to laugh. It hurt, but it healed too, stitching us back together. That night I opened the recipe tin, the pages yellowed, my grandmother's handwriting looping across them. I read her notes, little asides about adding extra butter or tasting the batter. I laughed, the sounds startling in the quiet, and felt her with me, her strength in every word. I decided to bake one of her recipes, a simple blueberry scone, the next morning. It wasn't about the shop or proving anything. It was about me, about reclaiming the joy I'd lost. I fell asleep with the tin beside my bed, the lake's rhythm outside my heart a little steadier. The morning light filtered through the cabin's curtains, soft and golden, as I pulled the blueberry scones from the oven. Their warmth filled the small kitchen, a quiet echo of my grandmother's love. Hannah was still asleep, the lake outside shimmering under a thin layer of mist. I broke a scone apart, the crumbs falling onto a plate, and took a bite, the sweetness grounding me. It wasn't just food. It was a piece of who I'd been before the pain, before Nathan. I closed my eyes, savoring it, letting myself feel whole. Later, Hannah and I hiked a trail near the cabin, the path winding through tall grasses and scattered wildflowers. We didn't talk much, just walked, our steps in sync. At a lookout point, we stopped, the lake sprawling below its surface, catching the sun. "You're different," Hannah said, her voice quiet. "Stronger." I looked at her, the wind tugging at my hair. "I'm trying," I said. "Some days it's enough." She nodded, her smile small but real, and we stood there, the world vast and patient around us. Back at the cabin, I found a letter from Clara tucked in my bag, one she'd slipped in before I left. It was short, her handwriting messy, but warm, telling me about a patient she'd helped, a woman starting over after years of fear. "You remind me of her," she wrote. "You keep going." I folded the letter carefully, my chest tight with gratitude. Clara had seen me at my lowest, and her belief had carried me here to this moment of quiet. I spent the afternoon alone, sitting on the porch with my notebook, jotting down ideas for the shop. Not just tarts or expansions, but a community class teaching kids to bake, giving them the joy I'd found in my grandmother's kitchen. I wrote until my hand cramped, the pen's scratch a steady rhythm. It felt like planting seeds, not for profit, but for meaning, for the life I wanted to live. The thought of Nathan's note, his coworker's venom, flickered, but I let it pass like a cloud over the lake. That evening, Hannah and I cooked dinner, a simple meal of pasta and store-bought sauce, laughing as we fumbled with a can opener. We ate on the porch, the air cooling, fireflies blinking in the dusk. I talked to Diane. Hannah said, her fork pausing. "She's coming to your baking class next week. Wants to learn." I set my plate down, my pulse steady. "Okay," I said, surprising myself. "Let her come." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a door cracked open, a step I could take. Before bed, I walked to the lake one last time, the sky a deep indigo, stars pricking through. I carried a small jar, one I'd kept in my bag, filled with the last of my grandmother's ashes. I'd saved them for a place that felt right, and this was it. I knelt by the water, the jar cool in my hands, and poured them gently, watching them drift, then vanish. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice swallowed by the night. I stood the jar empty, my heart full, and walked back to the cabin, the stars above me steady. The next morning, I packed up the cabin quiet as Hannah loaded her car. I left the recipe tin on the counter, a gift for the next guest, its pages holding more than instructions. Driving home, the lake fading in my rear view, I felt a calm I hadn't known I could find. The shop Lily. The class even Diane. They were pieces of a life I was choosing, not just surviving. I turned on the radio, a soft song filling the car, and let myself hum, my voice small, but mine carrying me forward. I woke to the sound of my alarm, the soft chirp pulling me from a dream I couldn't quite hold. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a window that caught the morning sun. I'd moved here after the divorce, trading the house I'd shared with Nathan for a space that was mine alone. The walls were bare except for a single photo of my grandmother's hands kneading dough, her rings glinting. I looked at it every day, a quiet reminder of where I'd come from. I slipped into my routine, one I'd built piece by piece. Coffee first, brewed strong, the kind that warmed my hands through the mug. Then a walk through the park near my building, the paths lined with oaks, their leaves crunching under my sneakers. I'd started this habit after the lake trip, needing movement to settle my thoughts. Today the air was cool, the sky a pale blue, and I walked slowly, watching joggers and dog walkers, feeling like I belonged in the world again. Sweet resilience was thriving, the shop a steady hum of life. I'd hired 2 more bakers, a brother and sister duo, who bickered over recipes, but worked like they were born for it. I spent my mornings there not just managing, but creating, testing new flavors like cardamom pear danishes, each one a small act of joy. The customers weren't just faces anymore. They were neighbors, regulars who knew my name, who left notes with their orders thanking me for the comfort of a warm scone. Lily had grown too, her confidence blooming. She ran the counter now, her smile easy, her sketches of tart designs taped to the office wall. I'd caught her teaching a kid how to pipe icing last week, her voice patient, and I'd paused, my heart full. She was proof that healing wasn't just mine. It spread like ripples on a lake. I'd started a fund for women like her, a small scholarship through the shop, partnering with a local shelter. It wasn't much, but every application I read felt like a step towards something bigger. Clara came by the shop one afternoon, her hair tied back, her scrubs swapped for jeans. We sat in the corner booth sharing a plate of cookies, the kind I'd made for her daughter years ago. "You're different," she said, breaking a cookie in half. "Not just the shop. You." I tilted my head, curious. "How?" She chewed, thinking. "You're not carrying him anymore." I nodded, her words settling deep. Nathan's name didn't sting now. It was just a fact, a chapter closed. I'd seen Diane at the baking class, her hands clumsy with dough, her eyes hesitant but warm. We didn't talk about the past, just mixed and kneaded our silence, a kind of truce. Afterward, she'd hugged me quick and awkward, and I'd let her feeling the weight of years soften. Hannah had been there too, snapping photos, her laugh bright. They were my family, flawed and fractured, but mine and I was learning to hold them loosely without fear. My evenings were quieter now. I'd started reading again, novels I'd shelved during the marriage, their pages curling from use. I'd sit by my window, a blanket over my knees, losing myself in stories of women who rebuilt, who found their way. Sometimes I'd write not plans or lists, but fragments of thoughts, moments I wanted to keep, the way the park smelled after rain, the sound of Lily's laugh, the weight of a good book in my hands. Tonight I stood at my kitchen counter, a cup of tea steaming beside me. The city hummed outside, a distant pulse, but I was still, my breath even. I looked at the photo of my grandmother's hands, her strength woven into mine. The pain of Nathan, the divorce, the betrayal. It hadn't vanished, but it didn't own me. I was here in this small, sunlit life, and it was enough. I sipped my tea, the warmth spreading, and felt the past settle like dust after a long day. One Sunday, I closed the shop early and drove to a farmer's market across town, the kind with wooden stalls and baskets of apples still dusted with morning dew. I wandered through my tote bag, swinging, picking up a jar of honey, a bundle of sage, a loaf of crusty bread. The vendors' voices mingled their smiles easy, and I felt a quiet joy, not loud or grand, but steady like a heartbeat. This was my life now, these small choices, these moments I'd learned to claim. Back home, I set the sage to dry on my windowsill, its scent sharp and clean. I'd started burning it, sometimes a ritual to clear my mind to let go of the day. As it dried, I thought about Nathan, not with anger but with clarity. He'd sent a letter last month, his handwriting shaky, apologizing for the lies, the affair, the greed. He'd asked for money, claiming he was struggling. I'd read it once, then set it aside unopened since. It wasn't my job to fix him. That choice, that boundary, was my freedom. I'd joined a book club recently, a group of women who met at a local cafe, their voices bright over cups of tea. We read stories of loss and rebuilding, and I shared mine, halting at first, then stronger. They listened, their nods quiet, their own stories spilling out after. One woman, older with silver streaks in her hair, said something that stuck. Pain doesn't end you. It shapes you if you let it. I carried her words home, turning them over, feeling their truth settle in my bones. The scholarship fund grew, applications coming in faster than I'd expected. I read them at night, stories of women leaving shadows, chasing light. One was from a mother of two starting a cleaning business, her words raw with hope. I approved her grant, my pen steady, knowing her fight was mine too. The shop became more than a business. It was a place where stories crossed, where people left a little lighter. I'd catch customers lingering, talking, their laughter a thread weaving us together. Ethan, the chef, Clara introduced me to, became a friend, his quiet humor a comfort. We'd met for coffee, then dinners, always at small places with mismatched plates. He'd talk about his restaurant dreams, his hands animated, and I'd listen, sharing my own. There was no rush, no pressure, just a warmth that felt new, like spring after a long winter. I wasn't ready for more, but I liked the possibility, the way it sat softly in my chest. One evening I walked to the park, the sky streaked with pink. I sat on a bench watching kids chase a soccer ball, their shouts fading as dusk settled. I thought about the woman I'd been, the one who'd shrunk under Nathan's gaze, who'd doubted her worth. She was still there, a quiet part of me, but she wasn't alone. I'd grown around her, stronger, kinder, more myself. The pain he'd caused hadn't broken me. It had cracked me open, letting light in. What I've learned is this: betrayal doesn't define you, but it can refine you. It's not about winning or proving someone wrong. It's about choosing yourself every day in the small ways that add up. It's about forgiving, not for them, but for the peace you deserve. I'm still learning, still stumbling, but I'm here, and that's enough. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and I'm holding it close. What's a moment that shaped you, that made you choose yourself? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this resonated, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for being here, for listening. Here's to healing, to new beginnings, and to the quiet strength we all carry. Take care.